How's it going, folks? This is Mike. I'm back to talk about the second Roger Corman Edgar Allan Poe adaptation, The Pit and the Pendulum, in 1961. The Pit and the Pendulum. Now, American International Pictures and Corman had been so greatly surprised by the success of House of Usher that they decided to try again with another film. And they decided that if something worked once, it might work again. So they brought back Vincent Price as the star. They also brought back Richard Matheson to write the screenplay, Floyd Crosby to do the cinematography, and Daniel Haller to do the art direction. And they built these beautiful, beautiful sets. And so proceeded to make this film based on the Edgar Allan Poe short story, a very creepy little story about a man who's being tortured by the Spanish Inquisition. So Vincent Price plays a man named Nicholas Medina, who happens to be the son of one of the most notorious and evil inquisitors of the Spanish Inquisition, a man named Sebastian Medina, who was known for his cruelty, his lack of mercy. And Nicholas lives in the family castle in Spain, and all the torture equipment happens to be in the dungeon of the castle. So, you can just go downstairs and you can find the pit and the pendulum, the Iron Maiden, the rack, all that cool stuff, because it's still there, right? So Nicholas is feeling very guilty because of what his father had done, because he feels like his tainted blood has been inherited by himself. He also feels guilty for another reason, because his young, beautiful English wife, Elizabeth, played by Barbara Steele, she's been living in the castle for a while, but she became so obsessed with the malignant atmosphere of the castle, being obsessed with all the suffering that had gone on there, that she began wandering around the torture chamber and couldn't keep herself away. And eventually she became sick and she died. And according to Nicholas's close friend, Dr. Leon, played by Anthony Carbone, she died because of the melancholia, or I guess that's the right way to pronounce that, melancholia brought on by the malignant atmosphere of the castle. So Nicholas is just racked with guilt about what happened to not only to the other people who had been tortured there, but to his beloved wife. And there's also in Nicholas's mind the fear that Elizabeth may have been buried alive. Now, the reason he feels this way is because when he was a little boy, he witnessed his evil father torturing his mother, and then before she died, walling her up alive, chained up to a wall and covering her up with bricks. So his mother was actually buried alive. So Nicholas has been living in fear that Elizabeth may come back to haunt him. Anyway, so into this wonderful situation comes Francis Barnard from England, who happens to be Elizabeth's brother. He's played by actor John Carr. He comes to the castle to find out exactly what happened to his sister, and he's met there by Catherine Medina, who is Nicholas's younger sister, who has come to take care of Nicholas, played by actress Luana Anders. So the movie opens up pretty much the same way that House of Usher did. You have a young man coming towards this weird castle, just like you had Mark Damon coming toward the House of Usher, and he's walking along the coastline of the sea, the crashing waves against the rocks. Now, this was the only reality in the film because Corman had just filmed the California seacoast, okay? But when John Carr is approaching the castle high up on a hill, it's a matte painting. So right away, once again, reality is going into unreality, going into the mind, as Corman interpreted Poe's stories as being something out of the subconscious. So the film is beautiful. I don't want to tell you too much of the story, but it's beautifully shot. It's amazing, again, what they could do in a very short time and with very little money. But it is my personal favorite of all the Poe films. It's actually one of my top 5 movies of all time. And it has a morbid atmosphere that just keeps building and building. And a lot of people find the film to be slow, especially in the beginning. I don't happen to think so, because I like movies that move along at a measured pace and bring you to this exciting climax. And that's exactly what happens here. So I would highly recommend The Pit and the Pendulum if you have not seen it. It's wonderful. Vincent Price does a terrific job as a man who is just, he's so tortured with guilt. He gives a Shakespearean performance in this film, really. and he is so tortured with guilt that it makes him insane toward the end. Film has everything: love, lust, betrayal, revenge, all kinds of really good stuff. Now, okay, so once again, the film was very successful, and they continued the series after this. Now, John Carr, who plays the sort of juvenile lead, I guess you would say, was an American actor who had had a certain amount of success, stage and screen, a little bit of television. A couple of years before, he had been in a very successful film called Tea and Sympathy, and he went on to a very long career mostly in television after The Pit and the Pendulum. His life would take a very strange turn in the 1970s. He decided to go to law school, became a practicing lawyer for something like 25 or 30 years, while at the same time occasionally accepting roles on television. And he passed away just a few years ago. Had a very long and successful life. Now, Barbara Steele, who played Elizabeth, had become very well known for Mario Bava's Black Sunday, which had been released in the United States in the early part of 1961, and that's why Corman wanted her for this film. To not, it wasn't really a similar role, but he just wanted her because of the force of her features and her physicality and her performance in Black Sunday. And it's a much smaller role, but it's a very good role, and she's perfect in it. Now she had taken a strange kind of odyssey back and forth the Atlantic Ocean at this point in her career. She had started out in English films in 1958, being under contract to a studio called the Rank Organization. She had done 4 films for them during the time when she was still finishing her art degree at London University. And in 1959, they sold her contract to 20th Century Fox. So she came to Hollywood, which is something she wasn't crazy about doing. While Fox was trying to figure out what to do with her, she was loaned out to Mario Bava in Italy to do Black Sunday. So she went there for a short time, fell in love with Italy, fell in love with Rome, and then when that film was finished, came back to Hollywood and was assigned to an Elvis Presley Western called Flaming Star, which she worked on for about a week. And then she got into some enormous disagreement with the director, Don Siegel, and she walked off the set, walked out of her apartment, packed her clothes, and basically walked out of her contract. Flew back to Italy, and Fox told her, "You'll never work in Hollywood again." She said, "That's fine with me, goodbye." Well, she did work in Hollywood again because she was invited to come back to work for American International in The Pit and the Pendulum. How they solved that problem with 20th Century Fox, I have no idea. But while she was here doing The Pit and the Pendulum, she also did an episode of The Alfred Hitchcock Show, a very creepy little episode called Alpha, Beta, Gamma. And that's something you may want to research. I think it might be on YouTube somewhere. It's a very interesting little show. So after this was done, and she went back to Italy, and she was exclusively making films in Rome, Paris, and Germany, almost until the end of the decade. She would not make another American film until 1974. Now, Luana Anders and Anthony Carbone are a couple of names that if you're into cult films and the people who make them, they're names that you may have heard of already, and you should know them if you don't. Anthony Carbone, it's not Anthony, it's Anthony Carbone, had been in a couple of Roger Corman low-budget films already, films like Creature from the Haunted Sea and A Bucket of Blood, and he did a lot of films and television over the years, never making it as a top star at all, always a supporting player. And from what I read on the Internet Movie Database, he later on went into being a stage manager, and I think he may still be living, although I'm not sure. He would be way up into his 80s if he is. Luana Anders was another one who had started out in low-budget films and pretty much continued in low-budget films in most of her life. She was a very close friend of Jack Nicholson, who was also starting out at American International about the same time she was. In 1962, she made another cult film called Night Tide with Dennis Hopper. In 1963, she did a film called Dementia 13, which was the first film directed by Francis Ford Coppola. She was very well remembered in a good little supporting role in Easy Rider in 1969. And later on, while doing small parts in films, she was also a writer. She tried her hand at directing. Sadly enough, she died very young at the age of 54. She had cancer. And when Jack Nicholson, who had been her longtime friend, when he won the Academy Award for As Good as It Gets, he listed a long list of people that he was dedicating the award to, and the last name that he mentioned was Luana Anders, and it's a name that you should know about as well. So that is my little bit of trivial report about The Pit and the Pendulum, my absolute favorite of the entire Post series, highly recommended. And I will be back, hopefully tomorrow, for the next film in the series, The Premature Burial. Big surprising casting in that one, okay? So thank you for watching. Let me know what you think about The Pit and the Pendulum.